Hey, and welcome back to Talk a Better Worlds. My name's Sir Felix the Cat, and this is Nerd Talk Thursday, a show where we take something that we're nerdy about and kind of dive into it a little bit. So, on our first episode of The Blender, I did a list of detectives, and at the end of that, the editor made me come back, and I made you all promise that I would eventually dive back into all these detectives. So, here I am to honor that promise. And today, I want to talk a little bit about the greatest detective of all time. A man whose intellect is just completely unmatched. No, not me. Although, I am very smart. Today, I want to talk a little bit about Sherlock Holmes. The adventures and life of Sherlock Holmes are brought to us by Scottish author Arthur Conan Doyle. First being published in the 1887 Beeton's Christmas Annual in a story titled A Study in Scarlet. At that time, Conan Doyle was a doctor of little renown, living in Southsea, Portsmouth. It's hard to imagine that at the time of authoring, he had any clue just how big of an impact his character would have on the world. Conan Doyle modeled Holmes's mannerisms and methods after his own professor at the University of Edinburgh Medical School, Dr. Joseph Bell. The attention to detail and ability to gather evidence through use of observation and deduction between the doctor and the master detective are a perfect match. Said observation and deduction skills actually led directly to one of Holmes's most famous quotes. "When you have excluded the impossible, what remains, however improbable, must be the truth." In 1892, we received the first collection of Holmes's cases in The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. This would be just the beginning of his illustrious career, spanning 4 novels and a total of 56 short stories, mostly narrated by Holmes's dear friend and ally, Dr. John H. Watson. Watson did a significant amount of traveling, but was also an off-and-on flatmate with Holmes, sharing quarters at 221B Baker Street in London, whenever he returned home. Throughout these wonderful tales of mystery, Holmes would often refer to himself with the title of Consulting Private Detective, which makes sense, considering he is not an officer of the law. And side note, for the history buffs out there, the term or title of detective was first recorded in 1842 when the London Metropolitan Police established the world's first detective branch. We know his year of birth to be 1854, and the tales of Sherlock Holmes are set between 1880 and 1914, during the Victorian and Edwardian eras. If you are familiar with real-life infamous serial killers, you will be aware that during this time, London was under the threat of one of the biggest names. However, Holmes never did cross paths with Jack the Ripper. At least, not in any official canon. In 2009, players of the Xbox 360 and PC video games did get a chance to see what it would have been like with the release of Sherlock Holmes vs. Jack the Ripper, developed by Frogwares, who currently has a healthy catalog, if I'm not mistaken, of 14 Sherlock Holmes video games. For those of you wishing to step into the shoes of Holmes in this day and age, I can't think of a better way. Holmes as a person is a very interesting study. As brilliant as he is not completely infallible, and he is not the most tidy of people. On the topic of tidiness, he keeps his humble abode in shape by hiring a housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, who cares deeply about our master detective in a familial way. Holmes is also a user of pipe tobacco and cocaine, the latter of which started off as just occasional use and then grew into a full-blown addiction when Conan Doyle revived the character's stories in 1903 after a brief hiatus. In the real world, drug use was becoming more common in the Victorian era, with not just cocaine, but also with alcohol, cannabis, opium, morphine, and heroin. Outside of what Holmes puts in his body, there is another topic which is often debated in reference to him. That being, was Sherlock Holmes on the autism spectrum? Now, it is common for fictional detectives to portray autistic traits, and it says a lot about how the public views autism for people to consistently place Holmes on the spectrum. With autism first being diagnosed in 1799, it would be no surprise for Holmes to be on the spectrum. I personally believe he is on the spectrum, feeling it is evident not just in the way he thinks and views things, but also in the way he interacts with others, something I can personally relate to. Not saying I'm as brilliant as he is, although I am very smart. Moving away from the debated topics, let's talk a little bit about Sherlock Holmes' biggest cases authored by Conan Doyle. I'd have to say the biggest and maybe most well-known case is The Hound of Baskervilles. This is set in 1889 and involves Holmes and Watson being called to the English wetlands of Dartmoor to help the Baskerville family. So, hundreds of years ago, Hugo Baskerville had falsely imprisoned a young woman. She managed to escape, and Hugo chased after her with his friends not far behind. When his friends caught up, they discovered the woman had died of fatigue, and Hugo had been clawed to death by what they could only assume was a large demonic hound. So the Baskervilles believed that because of this, the hound was a curse upon the family, and that the demonic hound had ever since been picking them off one by one. And this is why Sherlock and Watson were called to assist, with the most recent death being that of Sir Charles Baskerville, who was found dead with a look of pure dread upon his face. Holmes dismissed the curse as a silly fairy tale, but still set off to investigate. Now, as always, I'm not going to spoil this story, even if it is from 1902, but if you like what I've described so far, you can go ahead and read it yourself, or just watch one of the movies or TV shows based off of it. A second most famous or popular case is a tough pick. Everyone has their favorites, with my favorite being the Red-Headed League, and that was actually named by a good number of people. But I'm going to go with The Adventure of the Speckled Band. In this, we have our client, Helen Stoner. No. We're not back on the topic of drugs. We have our client, Helen Stoner, and she fears that her stepfather, Dr. Grimsby Roylott, is out to take her life. Dr. Roylott is a well-off doctor from a wealthy family who is known for being very ill-tempered, himself included, as he spent time in prison in India for killing his butler in a fit of rage. Now, Dr. Roylott was previously married to Helen's mother, who had since passed away. In fact, Helen had lost her sister as well, and death seems to follow this poor girl. Before her sister Julia had died, Helen heard her last words to be, "The Speckled Band." Roylott shows his character when he threatens Sherlock with violence should he interfere. And, of course, he was not fazed by this overgrown monkey's threat, and Holmes moved on with his investigation. To see what happens, you will just have to read the book, or check out the movie from 1931, or the episode of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes from 1984. To this day, Sherlock Holmes lives inside all of us through our inquisitive nature and our love of mysteries. And he's a character that I just can't wait to see where he's going to pop up next, whether it's in a new movie, a TV show, or in his continuing tales, like The Further Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Well, that's really all I had for you this week, but let me know. Have you watched any of the movies or TV shows based on this absolute legend? Have you read any of his books? Let me know down in the comments. I'd really like to know. And until next time, take care. Hey, thanks for watching.
Give us a like if you enjoyed it, and dislike it if you didn't.
Let us know what you think about the channel.
And don't forget to subscribe.
Tell your mom.